Our holy and heavenly God, we thank you for the opportunity of being able to come together through Zoom meetings and through the internet that you've provided. We pray that you'll give us your Holy Spirit, that you'll open our hearts and minds, that we may hear your words and be able to have them stay in our hearts and minds so that we can retain them to use to glorify you. We thank you for this opportunity also that we may be able to share with other brethren all around Australia. And we pray that you will be with each and every one of us. And for those who can't make it, we pray a special prayer for them too, that you will watch and care for them over this Sabbath. And we thank you and ask for the blessing upon Elder Tess as she presents, and all those who are participating, that our words may be your words. And we thank you for these things and pray in Jesus' holy and heavenly name. Amen.
I thought that we would start with a review, but we're going to review and repeat and enlarge. I don't want to get bogged down in just all the quotes that we could use from these men, that they certainly give us plenty to choose from. I want us to just hone in on a few points. So just to revise, we were starting an investigation of 1888, and you, Brendan, asked, how do we tell truth from error when it's a left-wing source? What are some of the warning bells that should be ringing for us when we're reading external sources that are from a generally reliable stream of information? What are some warning bells that would help us see in any particular source that certain views in that source are going to be wrong or problematic? So before we investigated the warning bells of the left wing, we know that there's massive tolling bells with right-wing sources. And we wanted to see what those were. What's wrong with the right wing that makes us turn to left-wing sources in the first place? What makes us prefer the Washington Post to, say, the Independent? What makes us choose one over another? What's the problem with the right wing? I believe that the warning bells that should ring for us with left-wing sources are directly connected to the problem with the right wing. So if we don't understand what's wrong with the right wing, we won't be able to sift the left wing. So we went back and said, why are we left-wing in the first place? Then we looked at 2018, the Midnight Cry, two streams of information. We looked at the points that were within that message that told us we needed to change our political perspectives. And then we started to hone in on the right wing. Why? Why did we have to change? Now, when we started looking at the right wing, we could have just repeated what we've done in the past, just do a simple investigation of dominionism, Protestantism, Seven Mountains theology, church and state. It's all there. We've all covered it. But it's been nearly 4 years since 2018, and we are mature now. Technically speaking, in one reform line, we're mature now. We're meant to have grown from there. And we wanted to see what is the really underlying difference between right wing and left wing. There are many, many atheists on the right wing, and there are many, many Protestants on the left wing. So what is the really core beating heart of the left wing that differentiates it from the right wing? When we did that, we saw it was how they approach freedom and equality. The COVID pandemic has been a very good case study in this. We're able to see with just that one case study how the left wing and the right wing approach equality and freedom differently. There are also a number of court cases, Supreme Court cases, over civil rights that also help us see how left wing versus right wing approach freedom and equality. And what we identified was that the left wing prioritizes equality over freedom, even though it treasures both. The right wing prioritizes freedom over equality, though many of them treasure both, freedom has to win. So when these two principles collide, freedom and equality, whether it's in the context of a global pandemic or in the context of LGBT rights at the Supreme Court level, you're going to see the difference between the left wing and the right wing based on which one of those two they will prioritize, which takes preeminence when they come into conflict. Democrats, generally it's equality. Republicans, generally it's freedom. We could have left it there, but we wanted to look at the third political party in the United States. And while it is a political party, the third largest, more than a political party, it's a philosophy, and that's libertarianism. We're going back to libertarianism. We left it once Goldwater came up. Goldwater is the politician who many blame for introducing libertarian philosophy to the Republican Party. It is why the Republican Party is so heavily libertarian in their philosophy. We're going to go back to Goldwater and libertarianism and militia groups. But we wanted to bring in libertarianism because libertarianism is a little bit different to that right-wing, dominionist, Protestant package that we have been looking at the last few years. Libertarianism supports gay marriage. Libertarianism opposes church and state. Libertarianism is, generally speaking, wanting to defund the police, end the war on drugs. So we need to understand right-wing libertarianism. And the reason that I wanted us to investigate that, really without having planned to, we started heading down that road, and I do believe it's providential because so much of libertarian philosophy entered this movement in 2019 when people who were in the dominionist section of the right wing moved from the dominionist portion of the right wing just into the secular libertarian portion of the right wing. And that has had and continues to have an impact on this movement. So I want people to see a little more clearly some of the issues and arguments happening within this movement currently, historically and currently, that are still all about two streams of information and right wing versus left wing, still about Ipsos, still about the midnight cry. So we're going back to libertarianism. But once we looked at libertarianism, we went to that Vox article. Now, I am going to keep coming back to the chat to make sure I'm not missing hands up. So this is, at the beginning, a review, and at some points a repeat and enlarge. But I want to stop at periods of time because we may be wrapping up our discussion on atheism today. So we went to the Vox article. That is written because of what happened the year prior, 2014, Gamergate. That is the historical context of the article. And the subject, the fellow being investigated in the article, the case study is Max. So I just want to draw out what we've done the last about 3 weeks. We looked at Max. But he's just a symbol of millions of predominantly men with the same worldview, but we'll just refer to him as Max, standing for a much larger group of people. And we saw within that article made a number of times, I counted 3 times, that they name a type of trinity, something they've identified as existing within not just the right wing, but the far right in America today. And that is a worldview that's built upon 3 key ideological positions. First one, men's rights. Second, atheism. And third, libertarian. the third time the article lists this trinity, it doesn't actually list these three. It lists the crusade against what these three positions are fighting. And that was men's rights is fighting gender equality. It's a crusade against feminism. Atheism is a crusade against religion. And libertarianism is a crusade against big government. So not all government, but big government, left-wing, big government. Any government that prioritizes equality over freedom, any government that restricts freedom. So it lists, the third time the article references this trinity, it's listing this as a type of crusade against which these ideological positions are fighting. So we've put aside libertarianism for the moment, but it's going to come up today, and we've been looking at atheism. So Max stands for a much broader segment of the US population. I wanted to ask the question, why does Max have this position? Why is this his worldview? Why is he here? Because these type of men, this group within society, they're likely to, or they do say that they're not following an individual. They have moved beyond the foolishness of following religions, which they all see as cults. They've moved beyond that. Brody. Brody?
I'm sorry.
I can't hear you.
I guess he has been influenced and he has chosen to surround himself with people and read and absorb information that supports this worldview, and something in it at some stage has resonated with him, and he has chosen to follow that stream. Is that the answer you were looking at?
Yes, because that's not what he would want to hear. That's not what he would want to see. They have moved beyond a society where you follow someone, where you listen to someone, where you go to church and hear a sermon and be influenced by someone. It's very much an individualistic position where they believe they're following their own reason and their own rationality. And I don't agree with that. We all absorb information from somewhere. You're here because you think that this movement, like I think that this movement makes sense. You're hearing things and thinking, I agree with that. That has a foundation that can be supported. He's there for the exact same reason that you're here. He's heard things that he thinks make sense, that appeal to him for one reason or another. So where did he hear these things? What is he listening to? And we could speak about, as we have in the past, Jordan Peterson, Ben Shapiro, depending on the faction within the right wing, maybe even Tucker Carlson. And they might weave religion into what they say, although I don't think what they say needs religion. But they might do that. They do that. Instead, because we see atheism as a component of this, we wanted to see where he gets his worldview from. Before we do that, 3 points stood out relative to gender in that Vox article that have been repeating themes. So I just want to list, I'd like us to consider, if anyone wants to contribute any, some key points about gender, about how he and that faction views gender. Catherine.
One thing I remember from the article was that Max's point of view was that some of those gender issues have already been dealt with. The sort of voting rights and things like that have already been given. So the problem's been solved and case closed.
I agree. I just try to think of how to put that on the board. I don't know if he explicitly stated that in the article.
He said that his mother, I think he said
I'm
that.
not I agree with you, yeah.
Oh,
It was,
okay, yep.
I'm sorry, what I was saying was I'm not sure if he explicitly stated the year that he thinks it was. Did he do that?
I don't think so. I don't think he
Okay.
said the year. I just think that however expressed in the article, it sounded like, depending on how you define feminism, he would consider himself a feminist in one sense, but not the way feminists are today, because they're going on about, they're basically going even further than what the feminists have all perhaps wanted.
That's a good point. Is it okay if I write civil rights in relation to gender has been accomplished? It's done?
Yeah, that sounds, yep.
Josephine.
I may be wrong because I'm trying to get from memory. He thinks that women have their voting rights already. They got job, like equal pay, abortion rights. Something about the dog whistle or something. I'm not sure.
I think that's a similar point to what Catherine was making. You've expounded upon this point here.
Okay.
But yes, you're right. It's that idea that women can vote now. Women can work in pretty much any profession they like now. Has been nothing left for women to fight for.
Good.
So can you see how, is it okay if I just tie that into this point here?
Yeah, it's great.
Thank you for expounding on that for us. One point, I'll add one, you can still think if you like of another. I had three. The other one was that he associated feminism with religion, that it is a religion. Can we remember that? That he pretty much said feminism is a religion. Marie.
Oh, just the follow-on thought from the civil rights, gender is now done, that now it's infringing on men's rights.
I'm going to put that under here because it's directly connected, and yes, I think that is another key point. There is now reverse discrimination and women oppress men in society. Doesn't quite put it that way, but that's the conclusion that you have to see in his thoughts. Because like you said, then now that women have their freedoms, then in asking more of that, more from that they're taking away men's freedoms, and it's turned into a reverse discrimination. So I'm writing it this way for a reason, that women over men, women oppress men in society. Is there any more, Marie, or were you done? Don't want to interrupt.
Now I'm done. Thank you.
Then I'll put it under here. What did I have up? Feminism. Feminism equals religion which is built upon the idea that there's no rational thought in gender equality. It's, but we'll come back to that. So civil rights, gender equality has been accomplished, or gender rights have been accomplished. Women now are oppressing men in society. Feminism is a religion, it lacks rational thought. And I had one more. And I'm not sure if he explicitly states that in the article or not. I didn't have time to go back through that article today. But I am positive that he believes this, whether or not it was actually stated explicitly, and that is the intrinsic differences between men and women. Intrinsic strengths and weaknesses. What are intrinsic strengths that men would be considered to have? Josephine.
Their ability to think rationally, biologically. Well, it goes back to
Rational thought.
yeah.
That's a good one. You could stop there, or did you have more to contribute?
Well, he didn't say this, but I think I was remembering what was said in the last lesson. What's this, Daniel Dennett talking about biological issues? It's not mentioned in that article, but it's sort of connected in my mind because of that's the way biology is. Men have that ability and women don't necessarily have that ability.
I looked up the definition this week of intrinsic. I think it's helpful for us to read. Intrinsic means it belongs to the real nature of a thing. This is the Collins Dictionary. Intrinsic, belonging to the real nature of a thing, not dependent on external circumstances. It's essential, it's inherent. So if I'm intrinsically something, then that didn't come to me through my external circumstances, my upbringing, anything that surrounded my birth, upbringing, society. It's intrinsic, it's inherent within me, not dependent on externals around me. Inherent means existing in someone or something as a natural and inseparable quality, characteristic or right. It's innate, basic, inborn. So when it's seen as intrinsic, it's not something that affects you as from prenatal or postnatal. It's something that is, and the word you used, Josephine, is biological. I think that is connected to this word intrinsic. They're talking about biological strengths and weaknesses, and that's important for us to see once we come back to the subject of evolution. Marie, I see two hands. Did I miss you?
Oh, I was going to say aggression for one of their weaknesses, or one of their main weaknesses that they tend to focus on.
I agree, but I would suggest they might not necessarily see that as a weakness. Because if you're a caveman and you're out there protecting your feeble wife who stays behind in the cave and pounds down grass or something for dinner, and you're out there hunting beasts, then evolution is going to develop aggression as a positive trait. So I'm not really wanting to put these into strengths or weaknesses because it might depend on the context. But yes, rational thought, aggression. I'm just not sure if they would always see that as a negative. Brody.
Leadership, which I suppose is rational thought, isn't it? But perhaps physical strength is tied into that. And also humour, of course, not forgetting kitchens.
I thought of humour, but the reason that he said men had the intrinsic strength for a sense of humour was connected to the fact that he believed men think rationally. So women walk through life with the, kind of like, you know, in a movie where you see someone and in their mind they're in this field of daisies or something. They're just completely not in reality. He painted the picture that women kind of walked through a world of their own imagination, not the world as it is. And because men walk through this cold, dark, awful world as it is, therefore, he actually contradicted himself because he put women on both sides of that women live in that fairy tale world, but then also that women see the fear of losing their children, therefore they exist in a dark world, but not the real world. It was a lesson in contradictions, that article. But the point was that women don't have that rationality to see the world as it is, combined with their fear of losing a child. So yes, humour, and I wondered whether or not I'd put that on, but I think it's still connected to rationality. I'll put it on anyway. We can contribute to the intrinsic strengths of women. What do they say the intrinsic strengths of women are? Greg, you can put for either if you like.
Not related to the article, but I was thinking for the men, they think they have a larger brain, so therefore they are more rational, and they have all the things you've written there basically because they have a larger brain, so therefore they got more neurons and they can think better. But that's just, like I said, not related to the article. And for women, nature and versus nurture. So women are more nurture than nature related.
Nurture. I think they probably wouldn't use the brain size argument now, but it certainly has been historically, it's been one of their ways to prove their point about women. Nurture is an important one. James?
For men, I was thinking of leadership, but for women, I was going to say the same thing Greg said, so just kindness, empathy, making babies, that sort of thing, basically.
Reproduction, nurturing. I agree.
So, yeah.
Just for space, I might just leave that for nurture for the moment because I dug myself into a corner there, but good point. Catherine?
Women have cunning, the ability to be cunning minxes, and they have their looks, their appearance, that kind of thing. Beauty.
Beauty. Can I put sex appeal for that?
Yes, I was thinking that.
That is what they're kind of getting at.
Yeah.
And connected to that, the other point you gave us was manipulation.
Yeah, there's this bit in that article where Max is talking about how the waitress is wearing a certain outfit and she's got this big sort of plan, you know, and then if it's not at work, then it's going to be at the nightclub later. And this is all a big strategy. And this is for reproductive purposes for her biological role. But she's using her beauty and her cunning and whatever skills she's got in her repertoire. to do what she's got to do.
So he does say it. That's good to know. He's making the same points. Josephine.
Okay, Catherine said it. I was just thinking about the waitress and her dress code for the night and how he looks at it. So what's the interviewer? She looks at it as just a normal uniform you wear to work, but Max had a totally different idea about the dress code, and to appeal to kind of half trying to, do the job and half appealing to the male. That's it.
You all have a better memory than I do because I'd completely forgotten about that part. But yes, he is seeing it that way, that women are manipulating him, that women do that within society. That's evolutionary, it's biological. It's part of their intrinsic strengths that men apparently don't have because women aren't attracted to bodies, apparently. Brendan. And that's assuming that lesbians don't exist. Brendan.
I was just going to say what Catherine just said as well about the waitress. And it's just interesting that he made the note that she's wearing those clothes to get money out of people or tips. So it's, it's not just about picking up someone at a nightclub later on because of those dresses. It's to get money out of people. So
it's about so it is about getting higher up in society. It's not just about a nightclub. It's about climbing the ladder in society and using your intrinsic strength to do that. That was your point?
Yeah, getting tips out of people. So she would dress a certain way. Well, that's what he's interpreting. She's dressing a certain way to get tips out of men. Whereas the interviewer was just seeing a perfectly appropriate set of clothes for a waitress.
And I want to remind us the interviewer was male. Otherwise, those people wouldn't have spoken to him. So his perspective isn't even just that of a woman's, it is of another man who, in his own words, believes that he has his eyes opened to gender inequality. But yes, thank you everyone for reminding of that important point, because I want us to see that these views are Max's views before we start speaking about where he got those views from. Brody.
Just a side point to that, that observation is actually real, that the sexism in society is such that a woman's dress directly relates to her success economically.
Yes. Yeah. A woman made a point one day that society gets angry at women who are considered gold diggers. And she said the only reason that women are gold diggers is because the men were the original gold diggers who went out and dug the gold, literally, while the women stayed home. So do women become gold diggers because they have this intrinsic biological strength for sexual appeal and manipulation to climb the societal ladder? Or are women doing that because every other alternative seems to be a closed door or a glass ceiling? This is the fight between culture versus biology as a root cause. So yes, does exist. Maybe she was trying to get more tips, but is that due to her biology or is that due to society and culture? So those were, I think, all the main points brought out really well, I think, as a class to kind of expand on Max's worldview. Men's rights is in opposition to feminism, atheism in opposition to religion, libertarianism in opposition to left-wing big government. Gender, these all relate to the gender. Some perspectives of gender in society is that gender, civil rights have been done and dusted. If I was to put on a date in it, 1960s, done. That women oppress men in society. Any thought otherwise is not rational. Feminism is a religion because it is not rational thought, and that men and women have intrinsic strengths and weaknesses. And we explained a little bit of what they mean by that. Josephine.
Just going to add to culture and society, those two words. In America, I think you may not get a real good pay as a waitress because, or you're not given a really good pay because the clientele that come to the restaurant usually tip the waitresses really well, and you end up having a lot more money from the tips than you do have from your actual wage. And the people do tip the waitresses really, really well.
So it's that issue between culture and biology. If they raised the minimum wage, if they brought in economic policies that might promote equality, what they currently consider to be a biological would probably disappear. Yes. So I want to, now that we've investigated Max, I want to look at where does he, and remember they're interviewing him because it's post-Gamergate and he's a symbol, someone who's willing to talk to them, of a much larger group of people. That's the point behind the Trinity. So pulling out the atheism, we then looked at the leaders of modern atheism, known as the Four Horsemen. The leaders post 9/11, some of them famous before 9/11, but these have been the influences in modern day evolutionary thought and atheism. And we listed them. Sam Harris, we discussed first. Second, we discussed Richard Dawkins. Third, we discussed Christopher Hitchens. Fourth, we discussed Daniel Dennett. And then we spent a little bit of time listening to what these men actually have to say about gender. And I just want to remind us, without going back through those same quotes, of a few points. Harris said that there are more women or more men within atheism, leadership of the atheistic community, but also within atheism in general, because men have intrinsic strengths that women don't have, primarily for rational thought and openness to an aggressive, emotionless debate. And that type of rational thought is an intrinsic weakness for women, which leaves them more susceptible to religion and more less likely to join atheism. He also said intrinsic strengths women have are emotion, nurture, etc. So Sam Harris really goes in hard on the fourth point, intrinsic strengths and weaknesses. We looked at Dawkins. Dawkins said that to question trans identity is considered by society to be heretical. I referred to that as dog whistling because there really are, kind of to simplify it, 3 levels. You have these leaders, you have all the maxes who are feeding off their messaging, and then you also have middle management. within the atheistic community. People who do not have the status, power, voice that these four men have had, but also are still influential and leaders. So you have kind of a three-tier system. And a lot of what happens up here is dog whistling, and you find it more explicitly stated when it gets to this level and when it gets to this level. So while Dawkins, that I've seen, didn't necessarily call feminism a religion, he claims that he is feminist. He says everyone should be a feminist, but he says that to question trans identity is heretical, and I said that was dog whistling. It's connecting his taking an unpopular position on a gender issue and saying that you'll face like a religious persecution. Just one point while we're discussing Dawkins. What we're doing is seeing what people genuinely believe, not necessarily just what they say they believe. They will show in these quotes, when they're put on the spot, they will show what they believe, and you'll also see what they believe by the position of their base. Trump doesn't say that he's a white supremacist. He dog whistles, and then you see white supremacists follow him. So you're not necessarily going to hear it all explicitly stated here, but when you see the effect of it, you see the effect of the dog whistling, and you know more clearly what the messaging is. We are doing all of this in the context of an information war, where Putin is able to convince millions of people that Russia is not at war with Ukraine. If Putin can convince millions of people that Russia is not at war, then end time events get a lot more complicated. Dawkins says he's a feminist. Dawkins says everyone should be a feminist. Then he goes on Twitter and says that, I'm paraphrasing, but I'm not doing him an injustice, that date rape is not as bad as stranger rape at knife point, and that any woman who says that it is needs to go away and learn how to think. So he says he's a feminist, and then on Twitter, to make a separate, logical, scientific point, he starts stratifying different categories of rape by severity. And he got into trouble for that, but he doubled down quite hard. I don't think that anyone should suggest that one form of rape or being raped by a stranger with a weapon is more harmful than being raped by someone that you might have known or had an element of trust in. But such is Dawkins, such is the feminism that Dawkins espouses. So he says he's a feminist, Putin says he's not at war, I don't care what they say. Just making that point. So Dawkins hints at feminism as a religion. You see that in his base quite clearly. Talks about an intrinsic nature, men acting on attraction to women. And again, he doubled down. He said if women don't want to end up in a situation, if they don't want to be in a courtroom testifying against the man who raped them, women should never get drunk. Again, he will say he's a feminist. It's not about what people say they were. It's not about people in the movement who say that they are left-wing and believe in equality if they're preaching libertarianism and freedom and men's rights positions. It's not what they say they are, it's what they live by. It's the effect of their messages. So he also references intrinsic strengths and weaknesses. Men are aggressive, sexually excited by women. Women have sexual appeal and manipulation. You put a drunk woman with a man who has this aggression, and car crash in a brick wall, what do you expect to happen? So that is, I hope we can see in his comments about rape, this belief in intrinsic strengths and weaknesses, his justification for rape. No comments so far. We're just going through what these men have contributed. These are Max's positions, so I want us to see them from Harris, Dawkins, Hitchens, and Dennett. Hitchens says women are the oppressors in society. Remember his article on a sense of humour. What does he say about women? He says that women are the ones who truly rule in society, and the only reason that anything looks patriarchal or anything looks like men are in control, the only reason that there has never been a female US president, me putting words in his mouth, is because men and women engage in this carefully orchestrated act. Men pretend to be the ones in charge, and women pretend to be the ones oppressed. We can get hung up on his phrase, cunning minxes, but when he says that, it's about this act that women are pretending, cunningly pretending to be oppressed. In reality, women dominate society and are the ones in control and the ones oppressing. So Hitchens makes this point very clearly. And of course, he makes the position very clearly about intrinsic strengths and weaknesses. So women oppress men in society. Point 2 and point 4, he really lays into. I want us to look at Hitchens, though, in point 1 for a moment. Do we have any thoughts or questions so far? And I want to give Hitchens just a moment longer. Catherine.
It's something vaguely in my memory, but I think there's a song, and maybe it's based on an old poem that was the female of the species is more deadly than the male. They sort of, I don't know if you've heard of that, but they were using some, animals from the animal kingdom and trying to, I don't know whether they have that sort of an idea when they're talking about women. Bit like, I don't know, a female spider or something like that, having to be more deadly for some reason.
It's an interesting argument to try and defend. Marie.
Yeah, this belief system that they have, and in particular, this I can't say the word, the strengths and weaknesses that they have, these inbuilt strengths and weaknesses, because I can't say the word, sorry. It reminds me, it makes me think of Putin outplaying that, in real life. And if they just stood back and just looked at what, the outcome of such, of this whole philosophy is, if they looked at someone like Putin and see what he's doing, it just makes you think where it leads. Like, can't they just see where all this leads? And yeah, I just think that if they just step back a bit and they saw that, you'd think that they'd have some common sense and that they'd actually, think twice.
Putin is using this to try and appeal to his base, worldwide base, that Putin has an intrinsic masculine strength, aggression, that makes him a rational, wise, powerful leader. Instead of the West, that with all of their equality and wokeisms and LGBT, is losing their way, that is becoming feminine. So Putin is very much using this. But again, it's about not really looking at what people say they believe or what position they say they take. If you go to Dawkins' Twitter feed, like I do, you'll find post after post condemning the war in Ukraine, condemning Putin, concerned about the civilians there. I want us to see this picture clearly, not just like an ugly manipulation of it, because unless we can see it clearly, we won't see how much danger we might be in to think the same way. It's that old adage, if you think Hitler has 2 horns and a snake's or a demon tail, then you're not going to expect a modern day Hitler to stand up and speak the way Trump speaks. Hitchens, he's passed away now. He was pro-gay marriage, against the war on drugs. He considered himself left-wing, voted for Barack Obama, and opposed church and state. So if you were to investigate Hitchens' positions, I'll just repeat that. Voted for Barack Obama, supports the decriminalization of sodomy and the legalization of gay marriage, supported the decriminalization of drugs or the end of the war on drugs, opposed church and state, and considered himself to be left-wing. In that context, I want us to read a couple of statements of his. Also just noting that while he's those 5 things, he was also a strong supporter of the invasion of Iraq and very strong supporter of Second Amendment gun rights. I'm going to quote him. He says, as 1968 began to ebb into 1969, however, and as anticlimax began to become a real word in my lexicon, another term began to obtrude itself. So just to kind of explain what he's saying, 1968 was a Civil Rights Act. So we have the landmark Civil Rights Act of 1964, and then in 1968 you have the Fair Housing Act, which is kind of built onto the Civil Rights Act. So Civil Rights Act 1964, Fair Housing Act 1968. What he's saying is that for many people, they just completely missed the Civil Rights Acts, and it was a type of anticlimax for people. And for people who missed that year and felt like it was an anticlimax, they started to introduce another term. That term, he says, is the personal is political. At the instant I first heard this deadly expression, I knew as one does from the utterance of any sinister cow feces, not his term, that it was, cliché is arguably forgivable here, very bad news. So he says, Civil Rights Act 1964, Fair Housing Act 1968, done and dusted. People felt like it was an anticlimax. He started to hear the words said, the personal is political. And the instant he heard the personal is political, he knew that it was a sinister cow feces, very bad news. So for Hitchens, the fight for equality, any fight for equality after 1968, any concept of the personal is political, what was his position on it? When did he think that it was all done and dusted? Again, we're looking at why Max has this position, because I don't believe Max. I don't believe he was just born more rational and came to this position on his own. He's gone and listened to men preach, just like some people go to church. He's taken this in from somewhere, and it has, for whatever reason, appealed to him. We've looked and seen how these 4 horsemen, let alone middle management, because it's much more obvious even in middle management, these 4 positions are held in modern atheism. We've looked at these last 3, but this first one, I want us to see it in Hitchens because he's explicit. Quoting him again, I remember very well the first time I heard the saying, the personal is political. It began as a sort of reaction to defeats and downturns that followed 1968, a consolation prize, as you might say, for people who had missed 1968. I knew in my bones that a truly bad idea had entered the discourse, nor was I wrong. People began to stand up at meetings and orate about how they felt. not about what or how they thought, and about who they were rather than what, if anything, they had done or stood for. So he says with the personal is political, people started talking about how they felt and who they were, not what they thought and what they stood for. What does that remind you of? Marie, is your hand already up? Is that before?
Yeah, that was from before.
Oh, okay, just didn't want to miss. What does that remind you of? Catherine?
It reminds me of this idea that if you can't sort of prove it, like measure it, observe it, it's not really real. So people talking about the way they feel, you can't prove it. I don't know, that's what it reminded me of.
We can bring a case study to that, Rebecca Watson. Now, we spoke about Rebecca Watson, what happened to her in an elevator. It was 2011, and it's actually called Elevator Gate. It was a major issue when it happened. It was quite a huge issue. It's called Elevator Gate and kind of seen as a predecessor to Gamergate, when Rebecca Watson spoke about being propositioned in this elevator. So she enters an elevator. She's spent all day talking to people about how she is sexualized within the atheistic community. Of course, what do they think of women? But she's sexualized within that community. There's sexism within that community. She spends all day at a conference talking about it. She's in an elevator in the early hours of the morning. A man comes to her and really likes what she said and suggests she comes back to talk about it more in his hotel room at 4 a.m. She felt very uncomfortable. And she said, very few words, please don't do that. Dawkins responds and says, stop whining, will you? He's telling her to stop talking about how she felt. Dawkins and Hitchens, of all of these men, I'd like to suggest they were actually the closest in ideology, but also personally. They'd never got together, the four of them, just the four of them, since that 2007 meeting where the term the Four Horsemen was originated from. That's the only time the four of them met privately like that. But Dawkins and Hitchens had a very close connection. And you see that in a lot of what they say. So I think it's reasonable to take what Hitchens says about the personal is political and feelings and see that, an example of that in his friend Dawkins. When he responds to Rebecca Watson, he's telling her to stop talking about how she felt, because this is what he sees happening. There's an elevator, and there is a woman, and there is a man. He's going to speak to her. That is going to make her uncomfortable, and she's going to ask him to stop. And she's going to say how that speech made her feel. Dawkins' point is that he did not physically hurt her. He didn't attack her. He didn't touch her. He didn't drag her out of the elevator. All he did was speak to her. He compared that to him getting into an elevator with someone chewing gum. It's temporarily uncomfortable. You get off at the next floor. It's no big deal. So she should not be speaking about her feelings. And his response suggested that this was an attack on this man's free speech, because he should be able to say what he wants. So who is the victim here? Again, freedom and equality. She's saying this is not just one speech for her. This is within the context of a massive amount of sexism, sexualization, and physical abuse, even rape that is happening within new atheism. Some of it is physical, but for Dawkins, all he sees is equality versus freedom. All he sees is her feeling harmed and him saying, that's just your feelings, that isn't harm. You want to know harm? Go experience female genital mutilation, which is actually what he said. Go experience the life of a Muslim woman in the Middle East. Then tell me what harm feels like. Stop talking about your feelings. Dawkins' perspective is the same as Hitchens. That's what I'm wanting to see from Hitchens' quotes and Dawkins, one of his real life examples. What does this remind you of? Both of them. So Hitchens, supportive of gay marriage, supportive of separation of church and state, also supportive of gun rights, says he's left wing, not right wing. What is the political ideology he's espousing here? Both of them. Greg.
Is it libertarianism?
Josephine, was that what you were going to say? Josephine?
Sort of part left wing. If you're supporting gay marriages, if you're left, he says he's left wing. So, what's he doing? Striding both sides, or more towards the left? Opposing church and state.
Don't have it up there anymore. I might ask the other few people because they might answer your question. They might go into further if that's okay. Marie.
Oh, I was just going to say that they're both espousing right wing. You got someone that's, you know, for Obama. There's so much of what he stands for which is left wing, but he's actually, there's aspects of him that are right wing.
Brendan?
Yeah, I was just going to repeat what Marie said. He's clearly on the right, as we already know. But his positions he takes, he's right wing, even though just by the sheer methodology he uses, appears to line, well, it aligns up with some of the things that the left agree with as well. That's why you had one of the white supremacists, or was it a libertarian white supremacist, end up at a Black Lives Matter?
Wasn't a white supremacist.
No.
Boogaloo
wasn't it?
movement. You're on the right track.
Sorry,
I
you're
just
right.
want us to not say white supremacist unless it specifically fits for a reason we'll get to.
No, you're right.
But I know exactly your point. Please continue. Sorry.
Yeah. So even though he's on the far right, his methodology, his freedom, the prioritization of freedom, actually, I don't know how to say it. I'm not sure how to communicate it.
You are saying it. It's fine. It's not. It's. You are.
I don't
getting
want
to
to
the
say
point.
it in the wrong way because it appears that they're agreeing with some of the positions of the left, even though they're not, because the perspective is totally different. The underlying intention is the opposite, but they end up at the same place, but not really. I don't know how to explain it.
You did explain it. This is, you all did. This is classic libertarian thinking. Can we kind of see that what we discussed when we were talking about libertarianism with them? Remember, libertarianism is the ultimate freedom over equality. Dominionists believe in freedom over equality when it suits them. It's interesting watching the right wing constantly compromise on freedom over equality. They'll say freedom over equality, and then they'll say, yes, but animal welfare. A very small percentage will say, yes, but the libertarian argument for combating climate change. They constantly try and make a point that what they see as serious really should be prioritized. That's what we saw with that debate over the Civil Rights Act, where a true-hearted libertarian said Title II and Title VII of the Civil Rights Act are terrible violations of individual freedom. And then the other libertarians said, yes, but racism was so bad, it was kind of necessary. So they do compromise. But true libertarianism is absolute freedom over equality. And it is absolutely right-wing. That is why there is a disproportionate pipeline between libertarianism and far-right militia groups. We're coming back to seeing that because we were meant to discuss the militia groups, but we got on another tangent called atheism. But a true libertarian believes in gay marriage, believes in the separation of church and state, believes in defunding the police. That's why you have far right of Black Lives Matter protests. Not all of them. The white supremacists didn't turn up, but there were some of them there. Decriminalizing drugs or ending the war on drugs. It's a classic libertarian position, but it is based on freedom and not equality. And that's what we were making the point within the movement. Every fight we've had since 2018 has been between freedom and equality. And that's when we see people say, no, I'm left-wing, I'm all for equality. I believe in equality, but they're not preaching equality, they're preaching freedom. And they're preaching men's rights, especially men's rights, and they're preaching libertarianism. That's what I was speaking about in Brazil in the last camp meeting. Josephine, Greg, did I miss you?
Yeah, I was just going to expand on when I said libertarianism. When you actually speak to a libertarian, from my understanding is you could sound like you're talking to a left-wing person until they get to a certain point and they would show their true colours of them being right-wing. So, for instance, a libertarian will agree with you on gay marriage and, as you say, defending the police, drugs, all this sort of stuff, church over state. So a libertarian can be a confusing person to speak to initially because they would come with agreement until it didn't suit them. And then they would choose freedom over equality. So that's why I'm saying a left-wing, they can appear left-wing even though they're far right. or right wing?
COVID-19 has been a very good litmus test for that. COVID-19 and gender equality, not gender freedom, but gender equality. Catherine, what is the difference? What does equality require of you that freedom doesn't?
Equality requires you to make sacrifices for the sake of somebody else. Because if you have privileges or something like that, but they don't, then you have to maybe give up some of your privileges for their sake. So it requires sort of like self-sacrificing nature or a generosity of heart. And it also requires somebody to be empathetic. So to somebody, it requires care and consideration. It requires sort of like a knowledge and an understanding, not ignorance, but, you know, information, but also compassion, freedom for everybody. It doesn't cost you so much necessarily.
I agree. Equality requires sacrifice that freedom doesn't require. I can say, I'm fine letting anyone marry whoever anyone wants to marry. If two men want to get married, that's fine. I'm giving them freedom. But if I want them to have equality, then if I have a cake shop and I don't want to sell cakes to them, they have their freedom, they can do what they want. Equality demands I sacrifice some of my freedom to provide them equality. So a society run on equality requires a sacrifice of a certain amount of freedom. Just believing in gay marriage isn't enough. Just believing in defunding the police isn't enough. That's why you have right-wing militia groups at Black Lives Matter protests. They're not there for equality. They're there for freedom, and their freedom, more than the freedom of a person of colour, they're there for their own freedom because they want the police decriminalised, police defunded for everyone, so just everyone has freedom. They're not there for equality. To understand the need for racial equality in the United States, you'd need to have empathy. You don't have to have empathy to just give people freedom. This is the difference between right-wing freedom, even where you see it in its most absolute terms under the banner of a libertarian, or left-wing equality. That is why equality requires, I might not like wearing a mask. It might give me a rash behind the ears. It might be uncomfortable. I'm going to sacrifice some of my freedom to wear on my face what I want to wear on my face for someone else's equality. They might be immunocompromised. They might need more of a helping hand from society, so society sacrifices. Freedom does not require anything from me, from you, from anyone. Doesn't require anything from Hitchens. So Hitchens and Dawkins is a classic libertarian position. So if they have interwoven libertarianism with men's rights, with atheism, what would you expect of their base? And we haven't even gotten into middle management today. So libertarianism, equality, and especially when they oppose church and state, why not gay marriage? Although you can say that and then try and get married to someone of the same sex in China, and it doesn't work that way. But for them in the United States, they don't mind, but then don't take Hitchens' guns off him either. He has freedom to own any firearms that he likes. It shows that his affiliation is libertarian philosophy. And being libertarian then, that same thing that libertarians say, the same thing that Max said, it's all done and dusted. Now it's just emotional people, mostly women, talking about feelings rather than beliefs. talking about the personal is political. And I find it very interesting that it's that phrase, that radical feminist phrase, that Hitchens calls a special kind of theses. Josephine, did I miss you?
Well, just referring to the comment I made at the beginning and everybody added to it, I was just going to say what they say is not necessarily what they are in practice. Their practice is so different from what they say. It's just their so-called rational thinking that they try to explain their way away, but in practice they uphold freedom. They don't really want to sacrifice anything.
One of the things that one of these women, I can't remember if it was Rebecca Watson or another woman, I think it was Rebecca Watson, said about Dawkins is that while he considers himself left-wing, while he's against Donald Trump, she said that it's amazing how little these leaders have had to say to condemn Trump. Their silence in the midst of 2016, all that's taken place has been telling. And one of the reasons for that is they have more sympathy with Trump and the right wing than they're willing to acknowledge. And they hold the left wing, Dawkins certainly does, holds the left wing at least partly responsible for Trump, thinking that left wing wokeisms turn society towards Trump. So they blame the left wing and his fight for equality on the rise of Donald Trump. And they are less critical of him than many of their supporters who thought that they were genuinely left-wing. It left many of them surprised, except for a lot of women. So middle management. I just want to read a quote. Today, if there was a Mount Rushmore of celebrity atheists, Lawrence Krauss' face would be chiseled somewhere in between Sam Harris, Richard Dawkins, and the late Christopher Hitchens. What that quote is saying is they removed Nennet and they put Lawrence Krauss in there, in the Mount Rushmore of celebrity atheists. Lawrence Krauss, we touched on, he, like many men who were impacted by the Me Too movement, is quite able to make a comeback. But I just want to list 4 men who were, particularly in this middle management arena, who were all found to have sexually harassed, sexually abused, in some cases raped women. Lawrence Krauss. I will list Rebecca Watson, but she's also within and fighting a community of other men in middle management. Lawrence Krauss. David Silverman was the president of American Atheists, quoting the Washington Post, to the thousands of non-believers who attend atheist, humanist, and secular events across the country, Silverman was a kind of rock star. He had trouble with the concept of consent. Richard Carrier and Michael Shermer. So those are the kind of 4, particularly 4 key men who were leaders kind of in this arena, and often defended by men in this arena. But this is just some evidence that these women like Rebecca Watson, they're not talking about feelings. The problem is this discomfort she's feeling is occurring within an environment where, their own words, this is worse than dominionism. Sexism, worse than they find in organised religion, including instances of physical abuse. And when they speak about it, they encounter death threats and rape threats to the point that many of them no longer attend conferences. And I'd like to also mention that the women here facing rape threats, death threats, hate from men here, many of the men, when they've tried to find who these men are, when they're sending these violent threats to them, these are not teenage boys in basements who are just enjoying the freedom of saying inflammatory things on the internet and getting away with it. They found that these were the men they were actually attending conferences with. These were adult men within the atheistic community who were sending many of the rape and death threats. Another reason why the women either stopped attending or some would only attend if they made sure they were never alone. Quoting from the Washington Post, in an article, America's leading atheist accused of sexual misconduct. The alleged misconduct of these leaders, quoting Sikiva Hutchinson, was tacitly co-signed by an atheist leadership that is largely hostile to social and gender justice and complicit in the marginalisation of women's issues. So she, who is an activist for gender equality within some of these movements, including the atheist movement, particularly the atheist movement, is saying the abuse that these men wrought on many women and other men was co-signed by this atheist leadership, hostile to social and gender justice, because they believe it was already done, because they believe that women, through their sexual appeal, ask for it, men can't help it, because they believe that women actually oppress men in society, and feminism has gone too far, if they believe in feminism at all. All I wanted to do with this exercise was show us how we went to Max as an example of this. And from here, we broke down his position on gender. Then we wondered where he got that from, and we went to here. And we saw his worldview here. And then the huge issue within the whole of the atheist movement, which they have helped, certainly haven't fixed. I did also want to make the point of libertarianism combined with their own atheism and men's rights activism. We could go further. Krauss retweeted and supported the position that some French actors, famous French people took that was hostile to the Me Too movement, that said it had gone too far. Krauss spoke out in favour of them attacking the Me Too movement. There's a lot to package around that, but all it does is build up the points that we have already made. And I don't want to confuse the points by going into too much noise. So that's what we've tried to do. Does that make sense to everyone? I don't think I've missed hands. I hope I haven't missed hands. We did that. We went to Max. We saw his worldview, broke it down on gender. We went up and saw where that originated from. And then what we also did last week is we then went and said, well, why does this exist within atheism? And we went back to Darwin. Because their position isn't just about their rationality, it's about their atheism. And connected with their atheism, it's particularly point number 4, this idea of biology. The first tenet of social Darwinism is point number 4, the intrinsic strengths and weaknesses. For these men, misogyny is not based in religion at all, but in biology. We might stop here for time, but there's a whole article I wanted to share, and I'm going to send that out. If we could read that before next week. It's kind of good because I wanted to read the whole article, and that probably wouldn't have been great. Do we have any thoughts or questions before we close? And I'll just the article is by the Scientific American. The Scientific American is a popular science magazine. Many famous scientists, including Albert Einstein, have contributed articles to it. It's been in print since 1845. It's the oldest continuously published monthly magazine in the United States. So it's an article by the Scientific American entitled "Darwin was sexist, and so are many modern scientists. For far too long, Darwinian theory has justified sexist attitudes and behaviour." So I was wrong. We're not wrapping it up next week. I guess we will next week. But it's been great to have contribution. I hope you can see how we've reviewed, but we've repeated and enlarged. I've tried to break down the steps we took. Step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4 to Darwin, and then we took a step 5 to see its ultimate conclusion with Roy Den Hollander. Roy Den Hollander, who believed strongly that women oppressed men in society, that feminism was a religion, which is why he tried to sue a university that had gender studies for violating the First Amendment, and believed that men's evolutionary physical strength should be able to be used to beat women if women were able to use their evolutionary strength, manipulation and sex appeal. So we went 1, 2, 3, Darwin and Roy Van Hollander, which we can do next time. We'll continue, we'll repeat and enlarge and finish that. Brendan.
I did my best. I've got a question, but I'm not sure if I remember it the way you phrased it about 6 or 8 weeks ago. I tried to find it in one of the Vespers studies, so I'm hoping you can remind me, but you said something like Protestantism in regards to sexism and the Sunday law. This is just as we were leading into this whole discussion on atheism, libertarianism. We were leading into that, and you said something at the end of one of the Vespers study that went along this line. It went, Protestantism isn't the whole of the problem, and it's not the cause of the problem in relation to sexism or the Sunday law. And it's not a church and state issue. So is this, I guess, if Protestantism isn't the cause of the Sunday law, or is this what we've been discussing here? Is this the cause of the gender? So where we're heading into Darwinism and the intrinsic strengths and weaknesses, which is, are we looking at the, what's going to bring about, I just can't remember exactly how you phrased it. It's only part of the problem, but it's not the cause, Protestantism. And then we started going down this track here, and it was in relation to the Sunday law. And you were saying Protestantism isn't the cause. And I'm just wondering, the Sunday law is what we're looking at right here, right now, the cause. Because you've got the Trinity. It's only as a part of it.
So Protestantism is not the whole?
No.
And it's not the cause.
So where's the cause come from? Is, I guess, because you didn't answer it, but we've been doing this ever since.
I thought that is exactly what we would look at today, but I thought that we would complete our review today. Okay. So I might not, I think that is what we've gotten so far through. I really thought that we would go through all step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then address that tonight.
Okay.
But if you can hold on another week, I think that I'd just like to get through, have one more look at Darwin. We don't really have much to say about Roy Den Hollander except to see how he took this to its logical conclusion. And then your point is exactly what we need to address. Otherwise, all this discussion is a little bit pointless if it's not going to teach us anything about the Sunday law. Thank you for reminding us of that, though, because that is the point of this entire exercise.
Yeah, it's just you. Yeah, no, that's fine. I just appreciate it because it's the last thing you basically said before heading from apostate Protestantism down this path here, and this appeared to be the rest of the whole. and I'm trying to find the cause. And it looks like there's lots of causes, but we haven't sort of, I haven't explicitly heard you mention it yet. So
I don't think a
I'm-
one-word answer will make sense. I think
sure.
we need to do that together. So I'm not trying to just hold off. I really thought we'd do that tonight. But I think I would rather us draw that out. But I'm quite sure we will do that next week. And thank you for reminding us. I will leave that up here for then to remind us. If it's okay, we might close now, because I know some people are really tired. I don't want to keep anyone later. If you had thoughts or questions, if you're worried you won't remember them till next week, just text them to Elder Terry or myself. And that way we will have your thoughts or questions that we can remind you had if it's documented. I don't want to miss them. Brendan, would you close for us then?
Sure. Dear God in heaven, we are so grateful for the things we're learning. We pray for a blessing upon everyone who is listening to this and who is going to listen to this. Help these things change our mind so that we can be helpful and provide better service to you. Help us to increase our empathy and our knowledge. So we can help other people, those of our family and those we come in contact with. Bless your people. We're just so grateful. Thank you. We ask it in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.